Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. 1 year ago, Hurricane Irene wreaked havoc on the state of Vermont. Thousands of Vermonters responded to help out. One of those people was Helena Hicks of Newport. Welcome to the show, Helena.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wherever there's a disaster, you seem to be.
Well, I've really committed myself to helping people.
Right. So, when Hurricane Irene struck, how long was it before you arrived on the scene?
Oh, probably approximately a week.
And so you're from Newport. So how did you end up in southern Vermont?
Well, our headquarters were located in Burlington.
And that's FEMA.
FEMA.
Right.
And we have to go there and check in and go through all of that. And then we wait for an assignment somewhere.
Right.
And while I was waiting for an assignment, I did some work there in the Joint Field Office, which is known as. And finally, I got an assignment. They said, you're going to Bennington, Vermont. I said, fine. There's an awful lot of damage down there, Scott. Tremendous need for FEMA to be there to help people.
Right. And when you arrived, what did you find in Bennington?
It was terrible. There was debris side of the road. Where the rivers had swollen was undescribable. Damage every place. Some of the roads were closed. We reported at the fire station where our headquarters was set up. And of course we had to get all organized and get the people in there and ready to go.
Right. So at 92 years old, even though you're in the prime of your life, well, maybe not quite prime, but you are in remarkable shape. You probably weren't filling sandbags. What were you doing?
Well, I was dealing with people 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night.
Right. You know, you've been in the eye of many disasters. Is there a part of you, when you see a disaster that might be preparing to happen, like in the days leading up to Irene, it looked like it was going to be a major hurricane. Do you get an adrenaline rush?
I can't describe the feeling. It's lighting up a Christmas tree.
But you probably hope for the best, though, for the people.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I always hope that I get called out so I can get to work. I start collecting my things that are going into the suitcase, waiting for the call. FEMA, you check in every 30 days, available or not available, and I really checked my status immediately to see that I was checked as available.
Right. So how long were you down in Bennington?
A little over a month.
Right. How do you think we responded as a state?
You mean for assistance?
Yeah, for assistance.
Well, we saw a lot of people come in there, Scott, and at the reception desk, my job was to get their name and basically what happened to them, get a feel of what they needed to see. Also set up in our disaster center were the hazard mitigation people and the SBA people. And part of my job was to listen to what they're saying and then get them around to the people at the computers and the other agencies to help them.
You know, are you the, you know, as I said, you're 92, right?
Going on.
Oh, you're going on
Going
92.
on
So in Bennington at 91 years old, were you the oldest member of FEMA?
I believe I am, Scott.
Right.
I'm proud of it.
Now, this is kind of an odd question to ask because you are a unique person, but
Thank you.
it seems to me like you're a little bit like Betty White.
That's, yes.
Because Betty White is outspoken, and I don't think anybody's accused you of being shy.
I'm outspoken with caution.
Right. Now, before the show, I guess I didn't realize that you've yet again gone into retirement from your third career, as in
That is
you're
correct.
currently not working for FEMA.
Right. 31 of us were so-called retired last March.
Was that because of your age, or just?
Well, some of us are trying to find out what happened. They said that every region had to be cut down for employees. We were overstaffed, and of course FEMA's going to go into a new policy that everybody will be called out of Washington, D.C.
Right.
No more being called out of Region 1 or 10, of which we were 10 regions.
Right. So assuming that you don't return to FEMA, have you decided what your next career is?
I'm
Because
looking for
you've
one.
never, have you ever really been retired?
Never. I'm looking for some kind of a career, volunteer.
Right.
Somebody needs my help, I'll be there.
Right. So let's go back. Who is Helena Hicks? Because I've known of you all of my life, and it seems like if I had to think back, you were involved with the Red Cross and the CPR and all of that. Am I correct?
That is correct. I was a CPR first aid instructor,
Right.
as well as the executive director for 37 years
Right.
for the American Red Cross, which encompassed 3 counties.
Right.
And we had 27 towns with our services to that. And I was on call again 24/7 as a disaster. I also worked for the National Red Cross as a disaster specialist.
Right. Now, were you born and raised in Newport?
Born and raised here.
Now, who were your parents?
My dad was a railroad man, 48 years, Canadian Pacific, and my mother was a nurse.
And what was their names?
Ralph Gustin and Leafa Gustin, and I had one sister, Celesta Bridge.
Right. And was was that the nature of your family?
Yes, Scott, you could say that. 9 years old, we came home from an event, and our house was all on fire. And I know what it is to have some rough living. In a garage, my dad had a garage, dirt floor. The neighbors brought in stuff for us. And I guess at age 9, I began to realize that it was time to help people. Of course, my mother being a nurse made it a little easier for me to realize that people needed help.
Did you ever consider going into the medical field like your
Yes,
mother?
I did. Seriously, my ambition was to become a nurse.
Right. And what happened there?
I don't know. I just got involved in volunteering for Red Cross. I found a great satisfaction in it. I manned the emergency station during World War II. My husband was in the service. And again, I realized what an emergency service really meant in a community.
Now, what is I guess I've never heard of that before. What is an emergency station or whatever during World War II?
We were at a desk and tuned in if anything happened.
That was here in Newport?
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm.
And so what else did you do during the war?
Well, I worked at the American Maple. I was supervisor in the packing room. And then I went to live with my husband down in Arkansas. I was down there a month and a half. And then I kept volunteering for Red Cross. And the opportunity came up to become the executive director. Father Fortin asked me if I'd be interested. And I said, well, yes, I guess I would be if I could qualify. So I, with 30 other candidates, took the exam and I was selected.
Right. And you were also was it a Newport police officer at one point in your life?
Yes, I was. From in my 50s, I was a FBI-trained police officer on the Newport City Police Department.
Really?
One of the first police women in the state of Vermont.
Now that was in your 50s or in the 50s?
The year's 50s.
All right. And how did that come about? Because you kind of broke ground.
Well, they advertised that they thought it was time to Mom said you have the job. And I found it very rewarding. And then Father Fortin, I still volunteered off hours for the American Red Cross.
But was that a full-time job with the police department? Part-time. And like, what did you do as a police officer? Did you just regular patrol?
Regular police, yes. I took care of the emergencies coming in. I was out in traffic control. We had a drowning in the lake. I was detailed there to control the crowd, which was quite a sad event. It was a personal friend of mine. And we worked 12-hour shift. I usually got the holiday shift, 12 hours, but I love my work.
How were you accepted as one of the first women officers? Were you respected as much as the men?
Well, the men, Yeah, I think the men took a look at, they got a woman in the force now. She's invaded the men's world.
So how long did you work for the department?
For the police office?
Yes.
4.5 years. And I became the executive director in June of '59.
And that's of the Red Cross?
Red Cross, and I worked as executive director, retired, went out in glory in 1995.
Right. Yeah, was that, they kind of centralized the Red Cross?
Yeah, they shut the office down in Newport.
Right.
Elizabeth Dole was the American Red Cross national president, and she gave the order that 99 chapters were to be closed, and ours was on the hit list.
Right. Was that a challenge for you to, because that was the end of that career,
Right.
right? And is that where you joined FEMA?
Yes, it was.
Right.
Well, I've been in FEMA off and on for special disasters since 1978.
Right. Okay.
And I started along with my duties with the Red Cross. And when we had a major disaster, I was relieved, administrative leave to go and serve.
Right. So we've talked before about some of the places you have been, but just tell the viewers some of the disasters that you have responded to.
Well, I've worked in most of the states in the US of A. Never been in Montana or Utah. I worked the central floods in New York. I got a call to go to Puerto Rico. We were in training in March, I believe, no, November. And I had my suitcase packed for winter clothes. And they said, "You're not going home today." And I said, "Well, what's the matter?" They said, "You're going to Puerto Rico." And here I am packed with winter clothes in November, so I went out and purchased a few and sent my clothes home. And Scott come next summer. Couldn't remember where my clothes were. They were up in the attic packed.
So did you always keep a bag ready
Yes.
just in case?
Usual essentials that you would take with your toothbrush and etc. Extra clothes and always something ready to grab it.
Well, it was interesting. Before the show, we were talking to Brandy, who works here, and for some reason, when I think of disasters, I don't think of her home state, Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
And you were quickly able to pipe up. Yep, you were there in 19...
Oh, I was, yep.
During a tornado, right?
Yeah, I was assigned there with the National Red Cross as a disaster worker. It was very interesting. I loved the country. People came in, and Red Cross assistance was a little different than FEMA. Basically, Red Cross took care of the immediate emergencies, clothing, prescriptions, right off quick what people need. Where between that and FEMA is the recovery. And Red Cross, so to speak, is the immediate emergency agency.
Now, you also have been overseas, like to Guam.
Yes, I love my Guam. That was a beautiful assignment.
No,
Really.
What did you do there? What was the disaster?
I can't remember the name of the disaster, a hurricane.
Okay.
And Scott, the trees were as naked as a jaybird. The leaves are gone, bark was gone. I was the assistant manager of a big service center. And my computer went down, so then I began to take on extra duties wherever they needed me. But the people there are the most friendly people you ever could hope. And every day they brought food in. We never were without food there.
Now, you mentioned computers. Now, I know at your age, there's people who are struggling to learn computers.
I'm one of them.
Right, but the thing is, it seems like you have been able to transition, because when you first began, when you first began this service to the world, you probably hadn't even heard of computers.
Never heard of them. In American Red Cross, we did what was called the 901, and it was a long, lengthy interview with people, person to person. Compared that to the computers. Computers kind of a hardcore thing. When I'm working with a person, I like to sit down and talk with them. I've been trained, excuse me, body language, and you can usually, what they're telling you may not be exactly what the problem is. Where on a computer, it's a code putting in facts.
You know, during a disaster, there's a lot of emotion and sometimes misplaced emotions. Have you ever been on the receiving end of some nasty exchanges, not because they didn't like you, but because they were just overcome by the anxiety? You must have faced that.
As the exit interviewer, after everybody's gone through all the stations in a recovery center, they come to you and you ask if there's anything else, and that's where you get it. I had somebody wad up a piece of paper in dead center right in the face. And I said, I'm very sorry that, you know, could we sit down and find out something you missed? And the exit interviewer has to know pretty well what they're doing. And I was able to help a lot of people as the exit interviewer with extra additional help.
So did you take that personal when somebody
Never.
vented, or did you understand that they really weren't directing it at you?
They were mad at the agency.
Right.
They were disappointed because they'd been devastated and they wanted immediate service. And with FEMA, it takes a while to do casework.
Right.
No, I never took that personally. I always said to them when they left, I hope tomorrow will be better for you.
Right. For the most part, were people really appreciative of your work?
Most of them were very grateful. They'd come, and I've had a lot of thank you letters.
Right. What about you had one child, right?
One child.
Right. And was your family very supportive of you doing this?
Most of the time.
Because they must have always been wondering, well, I wonder where Mom's going to be.
Well, my husband was a rural mail carrier, and I don't think he liked getting his own meals. We had a few words about that, but yeah, my family was supportive.
Right. Now, what was your husband's name?
Earl Hicks.
Earl Hicks.
He was a
okay.
rural mail carrier for 30 years. And my daughter, Carol Ann Melstruck, was also a mail carrier for 20 years.
Right. So did you respond to Hurricane Katrina?
Yes, I did. I was 9 months there, Scott.
Right. Actually, as we tape this show, I believe it's 7 years ago today that Hurricane Katrina struck.
That's about right.
Right.
Yep.
And I was actually there when I was in legislature. I had to go to Louisiana for a conference, and I toured the disaster zone.
Were you down in Ward 8?
I probably was. I was in Ward 9.
Ward 9. Excuse me, it was Ward 9.
Right.
That was the most awful sight. I've been in disasters, a lot of them. Right. And Scott, that is by far the worst thing I have ever seen.
Right.
Under the interstate, there was thousands of cars piled up, houses smashed into each other, nothing left. It was a hard assignment.
Right.
Very hard. I
know when we went down, I can't remember what month it was, but there was very few people living there, and you know what the problem was? The police were telling us is there were people trying to rebuild, but as soon as they put wiring in the houses, it was almost a Wild West, because
it was.
There were people going in, ripping out that wire and selling the copper, and
there was a lot of pilfering going on.
Right, and the military was still patrolling the streets when I was there, and
they had a curfew.
Right, and some of the locals, they were not impressed with seeing tour buses go through, because we went through as a bunch of legislators, and there were people out, instead of looking at us, give us money. And
right.
And there were some very bitter people, but we also spoke to people who were very upbeat. There was the principal of the Ward 9 school. It was a private.
Right.
I believe it was a private school, and she was very upbeat, and she was convinced that they were going to be better. Well, you know, she weren't saying the storm was a good thing, but she was confident that things would be better because of it.
We find that after most disasters, Scott, basically speaking, people have a better grade of living.
Right.
With the systems they have, building and so forth.
We were talking about the military presence there and just the Wild West way.
Right.
Did you ever feel threatened? Because there was a lot of
I've been threatened 3 times.
was that one of them?
Yes.
Right. So what happened?
Well, one woman came in and I was explaining our policy. There are certain things we can and can't do, like every agency. And she looked at me and she said, I'll be back with a gun and I'm going to end you. But I don't think her afternoon was comfortable in jail. You can't threaten a federal employee.
Right. How would you rank Hurricane Katrina compared to other disasters you've seen?
Hurricane Katrina and Camille are the worst things I have ever seen in my life.
Where was Camille?
Camille was in Louisiana in '69. That was my first disaster. I was a caseworker. They handed me 132 cases and said, go find them. And I said, where? They said, that's your job.
So you actually had to search out the people?
Oh, yeah.
So if they didn't have houses, where did you find them?
It was a search. It was a terrible assignment. We worked 14 hours a day on that assignment, Scott. There were no guideposts, no street markers. You just kept asking. I worked with the sheriff's department. I became an honorary deputy sheriff on that assignment, by the way.
So that was your first
Disaster.
That was your first disaster.
Right.
Were you just this Orleans County girl, born and raised, who hadn't really seen much of the world?
That's right. My husband and I had just returned from a vacation in Nova Scotia.
Right.
Phone rang and said, this is the Red Cross. You're being assigned to Mississippi. And I said, well, I think you have somebody mistaken. No, they said, your chapter chairman, Mr. Vizzini's given permission. So here I am, Scott, unpacking my suitcase for vacation, repacking my suitcase, ready to go on an assignment,
Right.
Mississippi. It was quite an exciting time for me because I didn't know for sure what I was facing. And my husband looked at me with kind of wondering what's gone on here. And I was down there about 2.5 months.
Have you ever missed Christmas?
I've missed all of the holidays, even my birthday.
Mhm.
Yep.
So, and your daughter, who unfortunately you lost,
Yes.
and did she also support what you were doing?
Very much so, Scott, yeah. She, as a matter of fact, if she had lived to retire, she was planning to put her name into FEMA.
Right.
She's pretty excited about it.
And unfortunately, September 11th, not only did the world change, but during that period is when you were losing your daughter.
Yeah, she died the 6th of April, and of course I had to take care of her estate. And then September, the 9/11 happened, and I was called 4 times to go to New York, but I had to refuse, and I stated why, because I was taking care of an estate of my deceased daughter.
Right. Now, if that hadn't been happening, I suspect that you would have been.
I would have been there.
You would have been
Right
there.
off. They called right off.
Right. A lot of people your age, actually, if they're still alive, they're happy sitting back, sitting in their rocking chair, or maybe playing golf if they still can. Why are you not satisfied at just sitting back and kind of cherishing the life you have lived?
Well, Scott, I get up fairly early in the morning because my husband being a rural carrier, we had breakfast early. And my housework's done by 11 o'clock. What do I do the rest of the day?
Right.
I don't like to sit in a chair and do nothing.
Right. Can you imagine, because you grew up in a time of, you grew up during the Depression.
Yes, I did.
And so you probably know what tough times are like.
Tough times is right.
But do you think you're a better person because of it?
Every time you go through a hardship, you become a better person.
Right. So when you see these people, because, unfortunately, even in my mere 47 years, I've seen a slow change where your generation, when I interview somebody who survived the Depression, one of the first things they'll say is, yes, it was tough, but we did it, and we did it without public assistance.
That's true. There were no public assistance back then.
But now we've almost we're slowly becoming a society to where it's almost like we're unwilling to care for ourselves. It's like, I am all for public assistance, but it seems like there's people who are just more than happy to live on it. If you have a little twinge in your back, well, that must mean you can't do anything anymore. Now, and you're a perfect example. 91 years old, I'm sure you could justify sitting back if you had every little twinge.
I could, Scott. I've lived with a broken back. I had an auto accident in Katrina.
Right.
And I have to live with a broken back. It's not fixable.
Now, how did you do that during Katrina?
Well, I was going home from what they called a boot training a week, and this young man was looking at some girls across the street and hit us broadside. And I sustained a head concussion and a broken back in the middle of my back. And it slowed me down a little bit, but I'm still willing to go out. I'm not happy sitting in a chair all day.
Right. So let's go back to your youth a little bit. We were talking about the Depression. Do you think that really did shape you and your generation for the most part?
Definitely.
Right.
Definitely. I remember my mother going to they had big cannon kitchens, and Dad had a big garden, and everybody went to the community cannon kitchen. So I know what it is to have hard times.
Right. But when you hear people talk about today as being hard times, do you think it's anything compared to what you experienced?
Nothing. There are many agencies when people are with their back against the wall can apply for assistance.
Yeah, because you probably remember the days at the Poor Farm over off the Lake Road.
Yeah, I sure do.
Where people went there to stay if they couldn't survive.
Yeah, they stayed there and died off, and that was the end of it.
Right.
Yeah. Now today they go to a nursing home, and if they don't have policy insurance take care of it, state pitches in.
Now, do you think though that even though there's some things that are bad about our system today, do you think for the most part it's better that you don't have to suffer as much poverty as you did back in your day?
And that, looking at it like that, yes, I think so. The bad part of it is, I think, Scott, people become too dependent. They don't get out and dig for a living, so-called. In the days that I grew up in, you get out there and kind of work for what you have. And I'm not saying today there's handouts, but there are many agencies that make life easier for people.
Yeah, and I think most sane-minded people understand the importance of those agencies. But, Ben Franklin even said that the surest way to keep people poor and oppressed is to give them too much.
It doesn't leave them any incentive to work.
Right. Because like you, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. But on the other hand, if I had everything given to me, I don't think I would have had the incentive to get out and do some of the things that I did.
I wouldn't have either. I would never have had that type of incentive.
Right. So, if you had never lived the life that you had lived, do you think you would have been the person you are today when it comes to helping other people?
Definitely not.
Right.
When you suffer yourself, you have a deep understanding what people are going through, more compassion, better able to assist them because you've lived it yourself.
Have you ever worked with people on FEMA or the Red Cross who you could tell maybe had no idea what it was like to go without, so they didn't have the compassion?
Unfortunately, that's true.
Right.
Yes, definitely.
How do they react how might they react during a crisis when somebody gets upset?
Coldly. I have got up away from my desk many times and helped people cry. Put your arms around them. Sometimes all they need is a hug.
Right.
reassure them that you're there, that you really care about them, and you understand what they're going through. They need somebody to understand what they're in there for.
Right. Now, when I talk to people, though, who are in disaster situations or even law enforcement, they said sometimes, though, you got to shut off your emotions. Do you think that's true? Like, did you ever shut off because you could not feel, you did not want to feel anymore?
I've never been to that stage because I've never learned how to turn it off.
Right. So, so where were some of your other disasters that you've been to?
I was down in Puerto Rico, Guam, Virgin Islands. Virgin Islands was a nice assignment. We had to watch out for the red ants. As a matter of fact, I didn't go to bed at night. I slept out in the porch because some of the people would go to bed with the red ants, and I wasn't going to do that. But it was a rewarding experience. I had a vehicle, and the thing there, Scott, that bothered me, we drove on the left side of the road. And being a Vermonter on the right side, I had to kind of get my brain into gear.
Yeah, I could imagine that because I know my daughter has driven to, has traveled to places where they drive on the left side. And she said it takes a while, but then on the other hand, it took a while to get used to coming back here.
Oh, and then when you return, you go through another cycle of change.
Right.
And usually people return in after a long assignment. There's quite an adjustment. Because you've lived where it's disaster, that's all you've seen, and you're back home where it's quiet. Sometimes people, you want to talk to them, they don't understand what you're talking about.
Right. Well, you know, in a sense, I know you're not a serviceman, but you have seen far more horror than some veterans
absolutely
ever saw. And we hear about post-traumatic stress amongst the returning soldiers. Did it ever impact you negatively?
Not really. I think most people working in a disaster, you get a reaction to it. Sometimes you go to bed at night, you want to turn some things off you've seen that are terrible. I've had people come into me with broken legs, broken back, and wheelchairs, bandaged up. I've seen some of the worst. When I worked in Rapid City, South Dakota, we were having a staff meeting, 5 o'clock. They said, everybody out of here because we've got another serious flooding. We went up a hill to a big church where we were supposed to be, and the road behind where I was driving caved in. I got up there and I was head of the first aid station all night long. And I saw one man come in, he said, I think I can shock you. And I said, well, I don't know about that. So he pulled up his shirt and he had 9 slits in his stomach with his insides hanging out. So immediately I ordered wet cloths and got an ambulance in there. I've seen some pretty bad stuff.
What about children? That must, being a mother, that must have been tough.
I'll never get used to children being hurt. They've lost their toys, they're deranged, they don't. The biggest thing with children, I find, Scott, is the feeling of insecurity after they've lost their home. They're very wiry.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes, like Tornado Alley, the section of the country known as that, you know, for those of us up here, you wonder, geez, you know, why do you stay there? But, you know, on the other hand, people look at us in the Northeast Kingdom where the weather isn't always ideal, and there are people who look up here and think, why do you guys stay in an ice box?
They tell me because their roots are there,
Right.
and they can't uproot them.
Right. I know my daughter is considering going to get her graduate's degree down in Tennessee, where tornadoes are far from rare.
Nashville, Tennessee.
Right. And actually, she's considering, I think, Chattanooga.
Chattanooga, Tennessee.
And
right.
so, you know, I did tell her, I said, you know, you got to study up on tornadoes just in case.
And adjust to the fact that it can happen anytime.
Right.
I find the people are a little bit wiry because they're always prepared, as you say in Tornado Alley, that something's coming through.
Yeah, but isn't there a certain level of complacency sometimes? Because, like,
Occasionally.
oh, now which city was it that was almost wiped off the map this last year? Okay, Joplin.
Joplin.
And they were saying that at least part of that was, people had grown complacent even when the alarms, even though they didn't have much notice.
Right.
Did you end up in Joplin?
No, I was in Alabama,
Right.
not Joplin.
Right.
And Alabama was probably the third worst thing I have ever seen. There was nothing left. We were set up in a church there. I interviewed people. We had soup kitchens going. Thousands of people homeless.
And if I recall right, it was just last year that was it your first time that you'd ever been activated in your own community?
The first
region?
time, Scott.
And what was that again? What flooding was that?
Irene.
Oh, was it?
Was Irene. I was stationed right here in Newport,
Right.
which is very unusual. It seldom happens that FEMA worker would be in their own city.
Oh, so then you went down to Bennington. So you
After
started
that.
out up
I think
here.
it was July I worked here in Newport, and I was called down there in September.
Right, right. Oh, so the Newport one was the flood and leading, in the
Right.
weeks leading up to Irene. That's what where the overflowed is. How did it feel to be working in your home community and actually helping the people you see every day?
I had a lot of compassion for them, but I knew a lot of my friends came in there. But we're trained, it makes no difference. You'll have somebody sit there that needs help. Regardless, friend, your worst enemy, you treat them all alike. You don't have any preference.
Right. So you're retired now, at least temporarily, until you figure out what you want to do with your
Right.
life. What do you think will be next? Or like, for example, just as we tape, Hurricane Isaac has hit Louisiana, which I guess wasn't too bad after all. When that was nearing the coast and you no longer are a member of FEMA, was there a part of you that just
A part
wanted
of me
to...
feels very sad.
Yeah.
I wish I were out there working, actually, helping people. But my plans for the future, I'm thinking about perhaps volunteering at the hospital,
Right.
because there's a great need there.
Yeah, and there are many people, very, very active people your age
Right.
working here. Like you got Joe Queenan, who's 89. You got Howie Geisel, who's 90 or 91. And these people are still in, I won't say
And-
they're in the prime of their lives, but
Yeah,
they're...
and Phil Armstrong works there, and some of my other friends I know. Matter of fact, I think I will volunteer sometime there. Of course, if FEMA at this moment called and said, "We're short, could you possibly come on a short assignment?"
Right.
I would go.
Right. So you didn't necessarily retire because that was...
No,
It was
not
time.
my wish.
Right.
It was not my wish.
Has FEMA changed over the years?
I hardly know FEMA that I knew in '78, Scott.
Is it more impersonal? Like, was it more compassionate in the old days?
Back when I first joined FEMA, we as FEMA workers cared and helped and supported each other.
Right.
And today it's a job, comparatively. It's changed.
Right.
There's a lot of bureaucracy mixed in it now, which to me is kind of too bad.
And has that slowly changed over a period of time, or did it
Yes.
happen overnight?
I saw the change coming slowly.
Right. Yeah, that's unfortunate because I think you need some of that
That's right.
change, but on the other hand, I don't think it's good take away all compassion.
When you no longer have compassion, you better get out of disaster work, because you have to really put yourself in their shoes and feel their pain to help them.
If you could go back to your youth, do you think you would have done anything different? Would you have become a nurse and then maybe have used your medical experience to help the world?
I think I would have become a nurse and volunteered my time. Red Cross has nurses,
Right.
and that would have been an ideal thing for me.
Yeah, because some Red Cross nurses ended up in the war zone.
That's right. I would have accepted an assignment easily.
Right.
Of course, I was a first aid instructor trainer, and I'm a retired EMT, emergency medical technician, and that's about as close as I came to being a nurse.
Right. You know, as for CPR, how do you keep up on the changes? Because it seems like the idea of the what is the appropriate way to do CPR these days changes all the time.
Do you know, Scott, I'll be honest, I'll have to be retrained. It's changed. I suppose they figure that there's a better chance to bring somebody back with the current changes. If I would administer CPR today, I'd have to do it the old way, which is no longer acceptable.
Because if I recall right, you don't even do the mouth thing. You just do the chest compression.
Chest compression, yeah.
Right. Have you ever saved anybody's life?
Yes, I did. Unfortunately, I did. 3 of us. We were in training in Boston, and they said 3 of you out. We got somebody down on the floor. We brought that person back, and I'm not saying this to hurt anybody, but between the time when the paramedics got onto it, we lost that person again. But we did. We saved the person. I had somebody on a plane once drop right in front of me in the aisle dead. That person we couldn't help. Yeah, I've been through hell and high water.
Yeah, you certainly lived a life that is, so much different than many of us. Have you ever thought about writing a book?
Yes, I am thinking about it, behind the scenes.
That's the name of the book?
Yep, it's the name of the book. I've already made some contacts, and I intend to start this winter.
Right. Do you have a lot of photos from your?
Lots of them, lots and lots of them.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I am trying to have a garage sale and reduce the items in my house.
Right.
And I found some photos of when I was on assignment in North Dakota. We worked 14 hours a day. And again, that was a terrible thing.
Right. So you've said you've only not been to 2 states?
Utah and Montana.
Utah and Montana. Yeah, well, neither one of those I think of as disaster, places.
They don't have the disasters that people like Louisiana or California has been hit several times. I worked a big earthquake there in '89. We worked off of the Presidio Army base there. And I lived on Fisherman's Wharf, and I was shaken out of bed twice. I said to my supervisor, I'm going home. She said, the only place you're going is to your desk to work.
Right. Now let's touch again on the disaster you didn't go to, the man-made disaster of September 11th. What were you doing when you heard about that, when you heard about the attack?
I couldn't believe it. I could not believe. As a matter of fact, Scott, I thought, this is a terrible fictional thing to put on the TV, till I realized that the towers were being hit. It was a terrible reaction. And immediately I knew my daughter was going to die, and I knew that I had her estate to settle. So I had the worst mixed emotions that I've ever had about a disaster. I wanted to be there to help them, but I had to take care of business home.
And that must have been a different type of disaster to handle, because, the other ones were what you'd call acts of God.
Right.
Versus this one, this was a man-made. Right.
Deliberate.
Well, as we prepare to wrap up here, let's go back to Hurricane Irene. We hear about Hurricane Irene in the media constantly. And I have a lot of sympathy for the people, but is there a bit of overkill?
It's overkill.
And, we talked about this beforehand, is, I think we're both sympathetic to the people, and
Oh,
it
absolutely.
isn't against the people, but, I hate to say this, this is a political year,
It
and
is.
I still think part of it is,
Reliving Irene.
right,
Yep.
and, I don't know if during the last year, I think it's easier to count how many days Hurricane Irene wasn't on the news versus was. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes when you hear about it so much, you almost lose your compassion.
Well, there's so much of it that it becomes just news
Right.
with no feeling to it.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate. Maybe it just comes with the business. I think sometimes politicians kind of use disasters or really sad events as
It looks like that's going on because it's been over a year.
right, and it isn't something that should be taken advantage of.
No, that's right. Absolutely.
So
You know, it's history, and the agencies have been in there working. Of course, some cases linger on. In FEMA, every time people put in an application, they send an inspector out.
right,
And whatever the inspector says is written down, and then they go from there for assistance.
right. Have you been back to Bennington
No, I
since you
haven't.
served there?
No, I haven't.
Right. Do you have any interest in just seeing what it's like?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to go back and see the difference, Scott.
Right. Have you ever done that? In any of your other places, like have your travels taken you nearby a disaster you had worked on earlier?
I'm trying to think of anything that. No, I can't think of anything.
If there was
offhand.
one place, one disaster zone you'd like to return to just to see it, where would it be?
Katrina.
Really?
Katrina.
Yeah.
Because there was nothing left. Bridges were gone. There'd be furniture up in a tall tree somewhere. That forever will be in my memory as the worst I have seen. Katrina's second. And I have to say that Alabama would have been third.
Now wait, which one's the first?
Camille.
Oh, Camille. Now, Camille, remind me, where was that again?
That struck down on the coast, Mississippi.
Mississippi. And then you said Katrina was your probably second?
Katrina, yeah. And then there was Ike and Gustav. I worked that one in Louisiana, was it 2-3 years ago. That was bad, but it was nothing compared to the other ones. I was down there 4 months on that assignment.
Now, one thing I haven't asked, is this, when you work for FEMA, is that volunteer or is that a paid position?
Paid job.
Right,
No, you can't, you don't volunteer for FEMA, it's always paid.
right. And do people come from all walks of life?
Every walk that you can imagine.
Right.
It's a melting pot of the earth. I have met all kinds of people, all natives, all colors. Of course, in FEMA, I never see color. I see a human being that needs help.
Have you run into anybody else who's 91 years old and still on the go, working for FEMA?
Well, I have a friend that's 89, still working, insurance agent, still working.
Right. But what about for FEMA though?
Yeah, for FEMA.
Oh, she works for FEMA.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And if you have it your way, you will be back to work for FEMA.
I would be back tomorrow
Right.
working.
And some people would say, "All right, Helene, you have done enough."
I hear that enough a lot, and they told me it's time to retire.
Right.
But mentally and physically, Scott, I'm not ready for that.
Right.
There's a lot of life left in this old 90-plus year body yet
Right.
to help people.
Well, on that note, I just want to thank you for for coming on the show. And you are just such a remarkable person. It gives me
Thank
hope
you.
that maybe maybe I can be productive even as I near 50.
Thank you, Scott.
Is,
That's a nice compliment.
Yeah, I just think you're an amazing person. I think
Thank you.
there's going to be a special place in heaven for somebody
Well, I hope,
like you.
I hope St. Peter says, "Come on through, and you've earned your rest."
And I'm sure if there's a
retirement.
disaster there too, you'll be the first one.
Yeah,
You'll be the
to
first
go.
one there.
That's right.
So, okay. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for all you do for the world.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure being here.
All right. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.